Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to HoopsHD.com.
Woohoo!
This is our weekly Hoops HD report. I'm your host, Chad Sherwood, joined by David Griggs,
Yes,
John
you are.
Titel, Joby Fortson. Four of us tonight doing a little four-person game here. This is our Hoops HD report. What the hell's this show about, David?
Well, Chad, that's the second. It's about the Hoops HD report.
Okay.
Essentially, we're running through the 10 regular multi-bid leagues, although two of them may not be multi-bid leagues this year. They're the ones that
At
least
two, maybe four.
Yeah, way more often than not have multiple teams inside the bubble. That would be the 5 power conferences plus the A10 American, West Coast, Big East, and I always miss Mountain West,
Right.
sort of.
Right, and we discuss anything else that's going on, but I'm going to start somewhere a little bit different this week than we've started in the past. We normally start by bringing up the screen share here and discussing one or more of these conferences.
We also have no idea what Chad's going to do. So like we're seeing it and figuring it out.
Yes, I know. I'm surprising all of you with this, but I'm going to start things a little bit different. But I'm going to bring up a couple something we don't normally do till later on in the season, a little bit of blind resume. And I got two teams up here. And David, before we announce what teams these are, don't you see two fairly similar resumes here between the left and the right?
Well, I know who the one on the left is.
Yeah, I know you can probably figure out who they are there, but the one on the left, 2 road wins against Tier 1 teams that are probably in the tournament, and another home win at Tier 2 against the same team.
Yeah.
On the right, you got 1 win against a team that's solidly in the tournament and 3 really bad losses down there at the bottom.
Yeah, and that win came at home.
And
yeah,
and that one came at home. And I want to bring this up here. I'm going to show who these two teams are. They are the right.
And when you say, Chad, I got to give you credit here because when you see blind resumes on ESPN, they have like 3 lines of very general data. You have the whole damn profile.
That's the whole damn profile.
Way to go! Yeah, like this is.
On the right there is the Alabama team that a lot of people are talking about as in or close to being in the fields right now. And Titel, I want to bring you on this. On the left there, I have a team that I have to ask if we have to do something we've never done before and put them on at least on the bubble under consideration, the DePaul Blue Demons.
I think this is a great comparison, and you see like Alabama does have more Tier 3 losses and less Tier 1 wins, and that seems to be a big part of our whole process every Thursday. So I think that I don't think you can have Alabama strongly in the conversation and DePaul strongly out of the conversation is how I'll phrase it.
And Joby, let me also ask you. I mean, DePaul, are they in the conversation?
I agree with John. DePaul deserves to be in the conversation, given that, especially the road components of 2 teams solidly in the field. I wouldn't completely trash Alabama's resume. I mean, the Tier 3 losses are bad, but I actually do agree where, for lack of a better word, the chatter is on Alabama. And the reason why is, it's only the Kentucky win, but no, it's not, because Murray State is dang good. Arizona is either in or out. These are a ton of at Missouri is a very good win. It's what a bubble team resume is. And I think they deserve, as everybody talks to them on the bubble. Yeah, they're on the bubble. And I actually have them on the good side of the bubble right now as my very, very last team in right now.
Right. And Alabama, and I agree with that. I hear a lot of that. But what about the Blue Demons there?
I agree.
Their road wins are better than Alabama's road wins.
Yeah, their road wins are better. And I think while they got those wins at home, the home win against Seton Hall isn't bad. Alabama, I mean, I guess it's just the Tier 2. They've got 6-2. So when you look at the overall, it's 7-4 in the top 2 tiers. And but I mean, the discrepancy when you look at the net ranking, 94-50, that's a pretty big gap. But where is that coming from? The out-of-conference SOS, I know DePaul's is pathetic. That's largely because Chicago State and Incarnate Word are on there. Without those two, they'd be probably in the top 300.
No. They played the entire MEAC.
Well, they did.
I mean, they did.
Yeah.
I mean,
is that what's dragging them down? And again, as far as when you would is there a level of suck that once you go past it, does it really matter that if a team's 347 as opposed to 287? I mean, do you really gauge those teams differently? Even though
yes, I actually
60
do.
in between. I know the computers do. But does a human with a brain do that?
No. A human with a brain, a human with a brain, I do. Because one might be unlucky. 280 might be unlucky, actually. Michigan State last year at 260. I think there was a little unluckiness with that 260 rating. You can kind of give it a pass. I'm sorry. It's an awful. I mean, DePaul's – there's a lot of awful on the outside.
Yeah, and that's the difference is that schedule. Now, had they played the Summit League instead of the MEAC, their record would probably be the same, and their metrics would be a lot better. That's the point I was getting at.
If they had played Northeastern, they might have lost, just like Alabama did.
Okay. Well, let me move along here. I want to bring up the Big East standings, and Tytel, let me go back to you here. I mean, DePaul, that was the win that just shocked me this week. Was that win at Seton Hall? That's why I wanted to start there. And I think you had some thoughts on it.
I don't know if I've ever talked about DePaul in any context, but when you start 0-2 to conference play with losses to Xavier and Villanova, I assumed it was going to be another terrible year in the Chicago region. But they've had a huge rebound, winning 3 of 4, sweeping Seton Hall, beating St. John's on the road. They have great size, 4 starters who go 6'6" or taller, good experience, 3 seniors among their top 4 scorers. Last year, 11-20. This year, 11-6 already. I'm not saying that we should have them as the coach of the year right now or the surprise team of the year, but they're certainly changing a lot of people's minds, I think.
And this is absolutely has been the longest we've ever just spoken about DePaul, especially at the end of January, David. But what about the rest of the Big East? Marquette did have a nice win week with a couple of solid wins.
Yeah, Marquette and Nova. I think Nova is approaching the protected seed mark. I know a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you all did, were thinking that this conference wasn't going to get anybody in a protected seed range. Now I think they could get 2, which is what we're kind of used to seeing. Top to bottom, it's a tough league. Creighton has February's come early. They're normally outstanding until February. This year it started in January. Providence, for a Providence team that's lost 4 of their last 5, I still think they got it in them to string together some wins. And what I'm saying is that I think the tournament is within their reach if they can string together the wins. And I think that they're actually good enough to maybe do it. I wouldn't even count them out, even though they're 1-4. So I think this league lives between you got the 2 teams that are pushing for protected seeds, and the rest of it is NIT caliber or better. Minus, and I would say minus DePaul, but look at DePaul. That's at least an NIT resume, isn't it? Yeah. You don't think you? So this is a pretty strong league, top to bottom. The bottom of this league is probably better than the bottom of any other league we're going to talk about tonight.
And I guess the problem with this league, though, Joby here, we do have a couple teams in St. John's and Seton Hall that are starting to slip. And maybe that hurts DePaul as much as I just promoted them for beating St. John's and Seton Hall.
Yeah, will those be tournament caliber wins on the road at the end of the day? We do have to ask that because they're starting to slip. Yeah, I mean, St. John's still has the record, but talk about a gaudy bat out of conference. Seton Hall, they're starting to get into the danger zone of overall record. Once you get within 3, 4, 5 above 500, you start getting dismissed quickly. And so Seton Hall's got to watch themselves. And the problem is Butler was the team, and we've laughed on this show repeatedly, the team everybody beats to have a good win, and sooner or later Butler's not a good win. I'm worried Seton Hall could turn into that if they're not careful. The Kentucky's going to pull Seton Hall up, but because I think Kentucky's just getting better and better. But the league as a whole is not where it was last year, and it will not get the bid numbers that it did last year. And the good news is hinted out is those bottom 8, among those bottom 8 or the 3 through 10, they're going to fight it out, and there will be bids to be had and bids to be lost, and we don't know who it is, so it'll be a fun conference to watch.
I agree with you. I think it will be fun, and I think it's a good segue, Tytel. Here's the upcoming schedule in the Big East. Creighton and Georgetown tonight, a little starting just now as we record the show, but what games, if any, are you circling here this week?
Big week for Xavier. They're hanging out in the middle of the standings, but they have 2 huge games, Providence and Marquette, both visiting the greater Cincinnati metro area. So I don't love this Xavier team, and now they have a chance to have 2 marquee wins this week if they can pull it off.
Yeah, I think we also got to circle that game Sunday, Seton Hall at Villanova. Seton Hall desperately needs that one at this point, as Joby was just saying.
That's not a good game to desperately need because that is a very hard game.
But winning it turns it right back around any problems
right,
they've had. Let's jump over to the ACC and Joby. We had the battle of 1 versus 1 that resulted with neither team being number 1 in the nation this week. But, we had the Duke Virginia game. And I want to get your thoughts on it, you being a Virginia guy.
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, Duke earned the win fair and square, no doubt. There's often bitching you will hear from me in calls that are gotten in Cameron. Grayson Allen making 10 steps before making the winning shot, for instance. With ending it with a jump step after running down the court without dribbling. Yeah. But this was a win fair and square, but I truly believe, and this is what I can take away from it, if that's on a neutral court or in Charlottesville, Virginia wins because Kyle Guy doesn't go 2 for 10 or whatever it is from 3. Now, and Zion Williamson still is missing his free throws. That's an issue Duke needs to correct. I don't think it's a fluke, and this could be a long-term deal because he's going to go to the line a lot. He and R.J. Barrett both are going to go to the line a lot, and at some point he might turn to hack-a-shack if he's only going to nail 55, 60%, that of course we did see Jay Huff try to do a hack and shack and he just went through the hack. But the thing that Duke did in this game that was beautiful planning from Krzyzewski or whether it turned into it was he turned it into an NBA game in that it turned into ISO ball. I've rarely seen a Virginia defense have to play isolation one-on-one. And that's really smart. If you look at the total numbers from Barrett and Williamson as a percentage, and you can throw in Cam Reddish at the end, they scored something like 90% of Duke's points. I mean, it was all done through isolation. It was beautiful, and that's why Duke didn't nail their threes, by the way, because while they can nail threes, they're not three-point shooters. And when Williamson's barrel into the hole, why not just let him? If this game's played in a different setting, I think Virginia wins. But, both teams prove that they're probably 1 seeds right now. We'll see how the rest of the season plays out. But I think all of us, I would be shocked if anyone on this panel didn't have both teams as 1s. And we'll see going forward. They're going to play in Charlottesville in a few weeks. We'll see if game day comes again to a Duke-Virginia.
Yeah, so, Joby, is that after the loss, is that seat starting to get a little warm for Tony Bennett up there in Virginia?
Yeah, I think UCLA's calling, right?
Yeah.
David, I want to ask you about another team, though. We just saw them play tonight, and it's almost like it's tough to say that this team will be forgotten, but they almost have been with all the Virginia and the Duke talk at the top of the ACC. What about the Tar Heels that almost seem to get written off by people recently, and now it just pounded Virginia Tech tonight?
Yeah, go ahead and pull. I was going to say, go ahead and pull them up there. North Carolina seems to about a year or two ago, I went back and looked, and I think for 6 or 7 out of 8 years, they had lost an out-of-conference game to an unranked team. And I think that, some of their earlier losses or lack of performing, especially getting blown out at Michigan, it takes them a little while to kick it into gear. Most people kind of forget about that at the end of the year because they typically finish so strong. But even the year they won the national title, they went to Texas and lost. They went to Northern Iowa and lost. They've lost at UAB. They typically aren't good right out of the gate. And because of that, I think every January everyone's kind of questioning them, not writing them off, but not really looking at them as a 2-seed caliber team or better. And tonight they just blew away a very overrated Virginia Tech team.
Overrated, but I think it's still a very talented team. I scored 103 points on them. That's but Titel, another team here. Let's talk about the team
profile. Look at that profile. That is pretty good. It is that Pittsburgh. Not to get too excited about Pitt, I believe that's their only home loss.
They also lost at home to Niagara. So
I believe that's one of 2 home losses.
Titel, on the right there, how about the Louisville Cardinals, another team with only 1 conference loss?
They're looking fantastic. They did lose to Pitt earlier this month to give the Panthers their first ACC win in over a year. since they didn't win any last year, but they've been very strong since 3 in a row. They beat the vaunted Tar Heels. They beat BC, which is now looking like a good win. They beat Georgia Tech, and now they're tied with like half the conference atop the ACC. They're favored to win each of their next 3 to finish the month. A brutal start of February. They host the Tar Heels. They go to Virginia Tech, to Florida State, and host Duke. I don't think they're going 4-0 against those 4 Titans, but Louisville is playing well above what I thought they could be. We could be looking at a top 4 seed for them by the time this is all said and done.
I would say they have one fairly easy game in that stretch, though, Joby. Florida State, a team that's going in the very wrong direction.
Wow.
Right now.
I am in shock because I actually, it's one thing, we laughed after Duke lost to Syracuse and Florida State, and Florida State lost after the Duke game. You said, wow, that is one hangover to lose to Pitt and, lose to Syracuse. Come on. Boston College now. I mean, this is getting really, really dangerous for the Noles. They need to stop it now. They are very talented. They are a good team. You saw what they did against Duke. They probably should have won that game. And I do stand by my statement earlier in this conversation that Duke is a 1 seed. It was a case, but I think Florida State can turn it around, but they need to. And the ACC doesn't give you a ton of opportunities to do it, though. Lucky for them, they might just get those opportunities coming up recently. They need these. They cannot mess around with Clemson.
Yeah,
they cannot lose them at Miami, and they got to take care of the Fighting Josh Pastners.
Right.
To happen because they're 1-4 in conference. 1-4.
When you look at their next 3 games, Joby's absolutely right. They need all 3 of them. They're all 3 winnable. They need all 3 of those, or they are in real trouble. Chad, I don't like the bracket that I posted today. I hate to admit this, but I think you were absolutely right that I overvalued Florida State. Now, in my defense, you notice they're still ranked for some unknown reason. I'm not the only one that is overvaluing, but there isn't a whole lot here. I mean, there's some good. There's a smattering of good, but this isn't top 25 good. And they really, really need to win the next 3 just to kind of hold serve and not continue the tailspin that they're in.
I would look at my rating and Kevin's ratings, because we're matching seed lines. We're pretty darn close on where they are. They're a 9 seed right now, and that's stealing off some of that early season stuff. If they start losing to those, even Miami on the road, et cetera, because Miami, we aren't big fans of in the hundreds right there.
No.
You start losing to Miami, et cetera, you're not 34 and 35 anymore. You become 50 pretty darn quick, and that puts you out of the at-large pool.
Yeah. Chad, we got to do it. Pull up Uncle Buzz.
Okay, give me a second here. Let's go back to you want to pull up the Virginia Tech profile. We'll do that real quick. I'll put it over here next to Florida State. Go ahead.
Let's put it next to Florida State.
Florida State lost to Duke at the buzzer. Like, I would not give up on the Seminoles just yet.
Right, but the resident, I'm just saying, they need this hangover. I made the joke last week, but I'll say that this is making Zach Galifianakis look, like a quick recovery, and it's bad.
Okay.
David, I'd argue that it's a very similar profiles here between Florida State and Virginia Tech. Florida State's good a little bit better because beating LSU is better than beating Washington. Virginia Tech's and Florida State's
Purdue was on a neutral court for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, but you got 5 losses versus 3 losses. And
right. Well, I'm going to ask the same question I asked last Thursday when we were building our brackets. And you'll notice here at the Virginia Tech profile, right there in the middle, you have the national rankings, top 10 in both polls. And then you'll notice everything else on this profile. And I just want to know what the hell the voters are drinking and smoking, because I got to get me some of that.
Well, you got to remember that Carolina loss was not there when everyone voted. So it was only
but
2
it was
losses.
Predictable.
But it was only 2 losses at the time. It was only 2 losses at the time. But I'm not trying to defend them because I do agree with you that this team is way overrated nationally.
And the one loss just tonight, which I've already plugged in, they dropped. That's not 12th in J&G. They're 18th as of right now after the loss, which is still top 25. But it's the bullet. It's not with a bullet. It's with a little down arrow.
Yeah, I mean Purdue is a solid tournament team. They beat them on a neutral floor. Washington is a bubble team. That's really it. The loss at Penn State. Penn State is not 75th. Penn State has a losing record overall, and they haven't exactly played murderers row.
And that's one spot. Penn State falls one net point and it becomes a tier 2 loss, so it's really right there. But Tytel, you want to defend Virginia Tech at all, or do you think he's right?
Oh, they were terrible tonight, but I think tonight's loss actually says more about Carolina being good than Virginia Tech being bad. The freshman amazing duo for the Tar Heels of Nasir Little and Kobe White combined for 50 points tonight, 5 steals, I believe 9 assists. When you have freshmen who are getting better as the season goes on, I think those teams often play well into March because you already have the veterans who know what to do, and if you can get the freshmen up that learning curve as quick as possible, which they seem to be doing, I think the Tar Heels, I'm not saying they're a 1 seed right now, but they're certainly heading in that direction.
Yeah, my contention, just so we're clear, is not that Virginia Tech is bad. It's that they're nowhere near the top 10. And I don't understand why people have been ranking them this high all year long. That's my only point.
Well, David, let me stick with you.
There's another team we'll talk about in the SEC that I think is also grossly overrated, but we'll get to that.
David, before we get there, how about the upcoming schedule in the ACC? What are you looking forward to? I think there's a couple of interesting games Thursday night, at least one interesting game Thursday night.
Duke at Pittsburgh, nice showcase game there, not very winnable. NC State, I think that their resume is a little bit flimsy despite the bloated record. Going to Louisville, I don't say they have to win that one, but they're going to have to win something like that between now and the end to really feel safe. Syracuse at Va Tech, the team that we just talked about.
I'll tell you, the other team that I think has a big week this week is Clemson. It's a team that's not really quite near the bubble, but has a shot to get there. Two winnable road games at Florida State, at NC State this week. If they could sweep this week, they're right back there in the conversation.
I agree. That's a tall order. Clemson has not really shown themselves to be that good this year.
I'd agree with that also.
Yeah.
But you mentioned SEC. Why don't we head there next and start with Joby, the new number 1 team in the nation. How about a team that was picked to finish 13th in the SEC last season, heading into the year? Now the best team in the nation. And the job that Rick Barnes is doing.
Rick Barnes, best coaching job he's done in a very long, distinguished career to date, and that's saying something. So, and that includes his run at Texas and those Clemson teams. This is outstanding. Tennessee, very worthy of all the accolades they're receiving. After all, they beat Gonzaga, who a lot of people says is a 1 seed. They've competed. Their only loss is to a Kansas team with Azubuike, which could be more and more relevant when we get to that conference. They aren't clearly number 1, but they, at least on my book, would be, when I said Duke and Virginia take 2 of the spots, I think they clearly take one of the others, and then we fight over the remaining one. And there's some good teams there. There's a lot of good teams at the top, and we'll talk about more later. But very deserving, great 1, 2, 3 punch. You talk about Schofield, great.
Yeah. And Tytel, how about that other team that is undefeated in the SEC that no one's is talking about? How about LSU?
Unbelievable. So they lost to Houston in December, which is now looking like a great loss because Houston has only 1 loss. And they were 7-3. They've won 7 in a row since then, favored to win their next 3 in January, and then, much like the team we were talking about before in the ACC, Louisville, a brutal schedule in February. 5 teams that are arguably top 25 in terms of different rankings: Mississippi State, Auburn, Kentucky, Florida, and the aforementioned Vols. So we're going to see exactly what they're made of. I don't think they're going to do too well, frankly, against that tough competition. Very young team, 4 freshmen and 1 senior among their top 8 players. So I think the next year is when they become a serious contender. Also, the definition of a home court hero, 10-0 at home.
Yeah.
10-0, they do have that nice win at Ole Miss from last week, though, that I think kind of gets them over that a little bit, though. David,
yeah, but
I know you want to talk about it, so I'm going to go right to you on them. I'm going to pull up a team on the left here, and I know you want to discuss them, so I'll just leave it open for you.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so here another team, as you see there at the very top, ranked 15th and 16th in both polls, so solidly in the top 20. And I think that they have beaten maybe no one. Like by my count, let me check my math here. Yeah, 0 wins against anybody that's getting a single-digit seed that's anywhere close to it.
Yeah,
I don't understand all the.
They're Alabama without the Kentucky win.
Yeah, the only thing you can say about them is that none of their losses are bad. But I can say that
Right.
about Murray State. I can say that about Wofford. I mean,
Right. Yeah, you could certainly say that about Wofford. Wofford arguably has a better win than this team. And it isn't – sometimes you can only play what's on your schedule, and sometimes good teams – their profile doesn't really match how good they are, especially some of these under-the-radar teams. The thing about Auburn is that even the so-called eye test, they don't even look that good on the court. Like, they had to sweat out Murray State at home. I know Murray State's good, but if they're really 15th in the country, should they be sweating out Murray State at home? They needed overtime to beat Xavier. They needed overtime to beat UAB. Like, at what point has this team looked anywhere close to a top 15 team?
well, how about that? Though, Titel, they did play pretty good against Kentucky over the weekend, didn't they?
They lost to Duke by 6 on a neutral court, and they beat team. If they had beaten Xavier, Arizona, and Texas A&M last year, we'd make them a number 1 seed. I understand that this year.
Yes, absolutely.
I get that, but like when you're losing to Duke and Kentucky by a combined 8 points, I think you're in the conversation. Of the thing about their team sheet, when you see when they have no tier 1 wins and only tier 1 losses, that means you're right on the line. That shows exactly who they are. They're good enough to beat all these teams and bad enough to beat any of these teams. They're right there.
Well, would you rank them 15th?
A little high. I'd probably have them closer to 20 to 25, but I mean, I don't want to plummet them for losing by 2 to a good Kentucky team that's going in the right direction.
Let's take a look at the upcoming schedule in the SEC. Joby, it should be coming up on the screen right here, beginning with an interesting Mississippi State-Kentucky game tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I want to see more out of Mississippi State. Kentucky has now gotten – I'm starting to believe a little bit in Kentucky. I think that the North Carolina game actually is when I really started. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
This Carolina team, which we've been praising, Kentucky, good for you. I think they'll take care of business at home against a tournament-worthy Mississippi State team. But this is an opportunity for Mississippi State more than it is, a reflection on Kentucky. Obviously, the big story this week is going to be the Big 12 SEC Challenge.
That's
we can talk about some of those games this weekend. It's going to be highlighted by that Kansas-Kentucky game. But the game that I'm really watching is I'm watching Iowa State, Ole Miss. These are 2 teams that right now on the resumes would be wearing white, I truly believe. Not protected seeds, but in that 6-7 range. Can Iowa State go on the road, like we'll find out later tonight, this is being recorded, as they're giving Kansas a good fight there. Can they go to a tough place to play and win? That's a big deal to win at Ole Miss. Likewise, Ole Miss, hey, you didn't protect your court before. Now can you beat Iowa State? I think that is a flexion point game that could be the tail of the season and send one team on to strong NCAA seed and the other to bubble land. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, to Joey's point, Kentucky-Kansas, definitely the biggest showcase game. But I think, some of the more important games, like Iowa State Ole Miss being one where both teams have a lot of room to grow. And then how about that, Alabama Baylor, another one. We haven't talked about the Big 12.
We're going to talk about Baylor here in a minute. We go to the Big 12, but yeah, Alabama. We saw the profile at the start of the show. Really needs a win like that also. And I'll throw another game out there on Saturday that's not part of the challenge, but that Auburn-Mississippi State game is regular season SEC game. 2 teams not in the challenge. Very important game for both teams.
Yeah, it really is.
And who would have thought West Virginia, Tennessee would be a joke?
Yeah.
Who would have thought it would be a joke? Of course, does West Virginia get their second scalp?
Let's say ask Kansas.
The Big 12.
Well, why don't we go right there? Why don't we go ahead and talk about them? Right, as Joby mentioned, we're recording this as both the Baylor, West Virginia, and Iowa State, Kansas games are going on, so those games are not going to be final on the screen here. But here is those Big 12 standings, and David, huge upset on Saturday, West Virginia knocking off Kansas.
Yeah, it really was upsetting for a lot of reasons. West Virginia was 0-5 in conference play coming into that game, and they hadn't really looked at all capable of winning a game of that caliber. And you kind of I'm starting to question Kansas a little bit. I know that are they going to be able to adjust to life after the injury and still play like a 1 seed for the rest of the year? And when they lose a game like that, you kind of have to wonder. But really unexpected. I did not see them losing that. I was surprised. I mean, all the way up until the final horn went off, I was expecting them to find a way to win it.
Well, they were up until I think the final horn went off also, David. And they kind of blew that. I mean, they totally blew that game. But Titel, what about their in-state rivals? One of the hottest teams in the nation right now, suddenly now that Wade is back.
Yeah, Kansas State was, to be honest, awful without him. They had a loss at home to Texas by 20. They barely beat Southern Miss by 4. They barely beat Mason by a single point. All they've done since he returned this month, they beat 3 good teams, at Iowa State, at Oklahoma, and at home against TCU. When Wade scores 12 or more points a game this year, his team wins. They're 9-0. Huge game tomorrow night against Texas Tech. The one thing that I see as their Achilles heel, free throw percentage among the worst in the nation, under 65% a game.
And Chad, you said that K-State was their rivals. They have a bigger rival, and for whatever reason, they're not matched up in the Big 12. What the?
Joby, I want to talk about another Big 12 team that I think we'd all written off when they lost home games to Texas Southern and SFA, but red hot and actually leading up 10 at West Virginia as we record this, where Kansas could not win. What about the Bears?
Amazing. And Mason means more than Clark, I guess, because with Clark, they weren't an NCAA tournament team. Then when he was announced to be out for the rest of the year, I was like, okay, well, you can put dirt on top of the Bears. And then Mason comes back, and he has given them the spark. They right now, it's great. We mentioned it in the Big 12 SEC Challenge. That Baylor-Alabama game, wow. If you are a basketball fan, if this was held late in the year, this would be a play-in game if it was the last game of the year, or like in a conference tournament type situation. It is so influential to both teams. And Baylor has no business until a few weeks ago of being mentioned in such a conversation. Who mentioned it? I think someone said, hey, I'll mention Baylor as my team that we don't talk about mid-year, that's not on anybody's bubble, that's going to now come in. It wasn't me, but I know someone.
It was me, but I wasn't serious. I said it in jest.
Yeah, I know. And now David is accurate because right now, they are. I mean, look at that. Look at Kevin. The best way is to look at the metrics. Look at KPI. Look at me. 51-48. That is bubble land. I mean, it's right there. I mean, and it's. I agree with my counterpart from Michigan State on it.
Yeah. Titel, the upcoming schedule of the Big 12. You already mentioned the huge game tomorrow night between between Texas Tech and Kansas State. But what about the rest of the week, including a little Bedlam Wednesday night, I guess? Huh?
It doesn't get much easier for Iowa State. They go to the Fog tonight, and then they have to play a good Mississippi team on Saturday. I like the SEC Big 12 Challenge. I think it's relatively new compared to some of the other interconference challenges we have in college basketball. But, I mean, a big week for Texas Tech at Kansas State, and then they got to host TCU. Plenty of great games in this conference.
Yeah.
Right.
How new is it?
Also,
Was it last year they moved it to January, or was it 2 years ago? Because I think they had a scheduling agreement. I don't know if it was a full-out challenge, but it was in November and December, and the idea was to get people into the arena instead of just having these bye games, get someone recognizable in November and December. And then they decided, well, this as an event isn't getting the spotlight it needs. We need to move it to after the football is over. So –
the one game I would point out on this list, Florida at TCU, two teams that really don't have a win on their resume, and after this game, I would argue they still won't.
I think you nailed it, Joe. But we discussed losses by Kansas, losses by Virginia. We had another top team go down on Saturday as well over in the Big Ten, where the Michigan Wolverines fell from the ranks to undefeated as well. We have no undefeated teams left. Michigan, David, falling on the road to Wisconsin.
Yeah, not an easy game to win, but it's not easy to get a 1 seed. I've checked, and only 4 teams get them. So those are the kinds of games that you need to be able to win if you really are going to be one of those 4. I still think Michigan could certainly get one. I mean, but kind of one of the things that you look for in 1 seeds is, are you able to beat a protected seed away from home? Michigan has, maybe, if Villanova keeps it up. But the other thing is, can you avoid losses to non-protected seeds? It's generally, like, when you look at the 4 1 seeds, they typically both meet that criteria, or all 4 of them typically meet both those criteria, or at least 3 of the 4 do, and all of them meet at least one of them. So by a 1 seed standard, I still think they can get them, but this isn't the kind of game that you typically see a 1 seed lose. And does it make room for somebody else?
Well, I think Joby, how about their in-state rivals?
Little brother is that team right now. After tonight, because we were recording this after Michigan State basically blew the doors off I will still say, a very good Maryland team, an improving Maryland team. Michigan State is, at least my now final number 1 of those 3 that we have discussed. They are playing great. They have not looked back. They have not lost since November, and those were a full-strength Kansas squad. And at Louisville may even be a fluke now, to a degree, as good as Louisville is. I think if you play that game even in the Yum Center again, I bet you Sparty pulls it out right now. They are on fire. And after the Maryland win tonight, I will continue to promote. They jumped all the way to number 1 in the JNG.
Let me ask you this. Yeah,
8 tier 1 wins. I mean, the Penn State win is kind of an asterisk.
Right. 8 tier 1 wins. The loss at Louisville was an overtime loss, by the way. You might want to remember that. But best win at Nebraska. Nebraska, not a protected seed. Do they need to win at Michigan to submit them up there, or get a win in the Big 12 tournament against someone who is a protected seed to be a 1?
I'm sorry, but can you answer this? Look at that profile. Can you tell David that this is not a 1 seed?
You look, Michigan is 10 points away from being perfect. Michigan State's only 9 points away. I mean, this is a great team.
I'm not saying they're not great.
Great schedule. And the thing is, I predicted the Spartans would win this conference by 3 games this year, which was looking pretty bad as of Friday night. Now, if they can sweep the Wolverines, I don't think they will, but if they can, then it's going to happen.
Well, if they sweep the Wolverines, then then they will have checked the box that I'm talking about, and then they'll be a 1.
Let's talk about teams that kind of heading the other way, though. What about Ohio State?
Yeah, the distant cousin to the south is playing terrible. This team was 12-1 on New Year's Day, but it seems like a year ago because they've dropped 4 in a row. Granted, to 3 good teams and Rutgers. And they have going 12-8 because they have 3 very tough games to close out this month. They host Purdue, then they travel to Nebraska and to Michigan. Very short starting lineup. We talked about the size of the other team who I talked about very recently, not Kansas State, LSU, who has 4 guys. No, who would I say was a big team? Somebody is a big team. Ohio State is not. They have a very short starting lineup.
Duke is a big team.
6'9".
Yeah.
DePaul has size. Sorry, DePaul.
Yeah.
Joby, I'll give you a little credit. Yeah, I think last week you were the one that was discussing Purdue and about how big that game in Indiana was.
Yes.
The home game against Indiana. They came away fairly easily this week with that win.
Yeah, and I will stand by it. And they looked great in it.
They did. They really did.
The key to me is when looking at Purdue, now that 5-2 conference record, it's what I've harped on all year. Out of conference, they were only 7-4, and that is danger zone if you go only 500 in your conference. That Indiana win, the at Wisconsin win, hey, something Wolverines didn't pull off. And a Maryland home win, Maryland can easily win on the road, this year. And Iowa is pretty darn good too. They've actually gone through some meat, in Michigan, the Michigan losses. They've actually gone through meat in the Big Ten. and come away 5-2, they're not going to be 9-9, 10-10. They're going to be 4 or 5 games above 500 solidly in this field. The Indiana win proves it, and we've already hinted this weekend. Wow, Ohio State, big game for both.
Yeah, not as good of a segue into Iowa as it would have been into Indiana, Chad.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll give you Indiana for a second, then I want to go back to Iowa. Go ahead, David.
Indiana has lost 4 in a row, and they're in real danger of losing as many as 8 in a row. Is this team going to pull themselves out of this tailspin that they're in?
Well, they're at Northwest. I think they can win that game at Northwestern coming up. So
they really
shouldn't make the NIT if they lose to both Northwestern and Rutgers.
Yeah, like Northwestern, it's not the easiest place in the world to win. They should be able to do it, but they better not take it for granted.
Well, then I'm going to quickly, if we're talking Rutgers losses, quickly segue into Nebraska, just to point out that as we record
what Nebraska is doing is trying to prepare themselves for close games that they're going to be playing in the Elite Eight and Final Four. So what they've done is allowed Rutgers to get the lead on them with about 6.5 minutes. What are you doing? Like you just don't understand the genius of Tim Long.
Tytel, I want to ask you about this Iowa profile. This is a team that you're very kind of quiet all year, but if you look at it, I mean, you took no bad losses, kind of like Auburn, except they actually have a couple good wins, unlike Auburn.
They're very good. I had been sleeping on them for most of the season and did not think that you guys were talking right when you had them so high. I now have them as a 7th seed, but they're certainly heading towards top 5 status, and obviously a huge game with both the Michigan schools coming up in the weeks ahead. No, as you said very well, 3 very good losses and a lot of Tier 1 wins. The non-conference strength of the schedule isn't that great, and a bit of a home court hero with 2 and 2 on the road, but 5 in a row is 5 in a row.
And Joby, let's take a look at the upcoming schedule in the Big Ten. There's a couple big games coming up tomorrow night, and Nebraska Rutgers as we record this right now. But Indiana with a road test, Minnesota, Michigan. What else are you looking forward to, though?
I think the Michigan Indiana game has to pop. Also, we praised Wisconsin for their upset of Michigan. Do you make mistakes if you're Wisconsin? Again, do you stub your toe against the 2 Illinois schools? If you do, you have blown all the street cred you got from the Michigan win. They need to continue on this because Wisconsin was heading compared to all these Big Ten schools. I look at the conference record. I mean, there's legitimate 10 teams seriously in the discussion in the average, in the average bracketologist. And the average bracketologist has at least 9 of those 10, and it's a different 9. Right. Every time.
I would just like to say real quick that is exactly what I am, an average bracketologist.
I mean, but
Wisconsin loses to Indiana. They can't lose to Illinois and Northwestern. It's a lot more on the line for them, than you think, because you got to take care of yourself against the bottom 4 with those 10 teams all beating each other up. If you are at the bottom end of those 10 teams, you can't afford the bad losses.
But there's so many other good games. You look at this Michigan State, Iowa. I mean, this on Sunday, Michigan State at Purdue, huge week for Michigan State.
Yeah, huge.
And big week for Ohio State hosting Purdue and then at Nebraska. So they really need those wins.
They need one of them. A team that I have a hard time pinning down. I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts. This isn't me pontificating. I'm just asking for your opinions on Mini because I thought I liked them, and then Illinois blew them off of the planet.
Tytel, you want to give your thoughts on Mini? I'll pull their profile up here for us.
Sure, I think they're perfectly average. I don't.
There you go.
I mean, 3 Tier 1 wins are nice, especially on the road at Wisconsin. But man, Illinois is terrible this year, and they lost by almost 30 points. I mean, bad win.
Yeah.
Double digits to BC, something that no ACC team should ever think about.
John T., I'm going to stick with you and move over to, I know, your favorite conference, the Pac-12.
Ivy League.
And Arizona bounced back from the Oregon loss to at least beat Oregon State, right?
It has been a rough little week in Tucson last week. Thank God we're moving on. So on Monday, Emmanuel Acott said that he's going to transfer. Thursday, they lost at home to the Ducks. Their starters only made 3 shots from behind the arc and turned the ball over 11 times. Then they get the Beavers. Chase Jeter only plays 4 minutes because of back spasms. Thank God they were able to get the win because now they're a half game behind Washington for the Pac-12 lead. They made a ton of threes against the Beavers, 13 of 27, looked fantastic. They host the Huskies on February 7th. They only play them once in the regular season. Fascinating contrast. Arizona, 5 new starters. Washington, 5 guys returning from last year. So the experience edge will be heavily on the guys from Seattle, but hopefully my guys can somehow pull it off. But even if they don't, I still think that if we can take care of ASU, which I don't know if we can, that like we're going to be in the conversation just because everybody else in the conference is terrible.
And Arizona State, Joby, actually had a nice week bouncing back with the beating both Oregon schools.
Needed it. Oh, my gosh, did they need this. Arizona State was out on a lot of the metrics and J&G, et cetera. They are now the Pac-12 team that is back in. Unfortunate for them is what helps them is not the Pac-12 but Kansas. Mm-hmm. And if Kansas goes down to Iowa State, they've already lost West Virginia. Yeah, you get swept by Iowa State. That hurts them, even though they beat them at full strength. You know, that's not how it works. It's that you would think the committee would say, well, they beat the full. It's not how it works. At the end of the day, if Kansas is no longer a top 10 win, it does take away from it, and they better be dominant in conference. They can't mess around like they did last year. Last year, they were hovering around 500 all year. This year, the Pac-12 is not good enough to do that because you will be collecting a lot of Tier 2 and 3 losses, and God forbid you lose to Cal of Tier 4 loss.
Interesting week of the Pac-12 a little bit. Both Arizona schools are at the Southern Cal schools, and Washington, we're kind of paying attention to them. Undefeated in conference at Oregon and at Oregon State, not an easy week for them. So you may want to circle at least those 2 games.
Washington at Oregon should be a lot of fun.
Yeah. And at Oregon State, both of them.
Yeah. And, if Washington gets both of those, you start to kind of look at them as being relatively safe, at least for the moment.
And the net has Washington at 36. I'm not sold that they are a 9 seed. I think they are just so bubblicious because their first win, and this includes the Oregon schools, their next win against a team that is in the common field will be their first. As a matter of fact, they have very few wins against NIT caliber teams there.
Yeah. So, Joby, what you just said is that they will not have a win against anybody that's in the common field. That is essentially what.
Let's keep moving. We're starting to run a little tight on time here. We'll move over to the American. And David, let me start with you. A team I'm going to pull up on the left here. UCF, we've been starting to like them more and more and more, and they lose a game to Wichita State.
Yeah, on the road, which kind of knocks them in like squarely on the bubble. You want to like this team, but like home wins over teams that aren't exactly road warriors is the best that they've really been able to muster. And what you kind of have to ask yourself is does the bad outweigh the decent? And do you knock them out of the field? Because nothing about that pops.
There's nothing in that profile except that pops other than that Florida Atlantic home loss. That's the only thing that pops at me, and I struggle with that.
Right now, they do have the bloated record. I suppose that pops a little bit, but one true road win that's not good enough.
Right, and Joby, I know you want to discuss the team I put up with the right there, Temple, with which falls at home to Penn.
I mean, come on, as soon as I get behind them. But the fact of the matter is I still believe Temple is worthy of this field. Congratulations, Titel. Your boys beat their second tournament team of the year as far as I'm concerned.
Like Tier 3 boys, thank you.
I don't think they're going to be Tier 3 for long because the Ivy actually has some strength in. I think Penn's the best. I think Penn's, despite the sluggish starting conference, will wind up climbing the rankings pretty effectively, into the top 75 by the time it's all said and done. But that being said, they are the only team to give Houston a loss. I don't care if it was at home. The fact of the matter is that means something. Houston is a good team. They've done it, and they really – I don't think Penn is that bad, to be honest. I don't think they're bad as that that off. Do they need to do more? Yes. Luckily for them, the American has a bunch of teams roaming around the consideration board, and they're going to be facing a few coming up. Cincinnati, Memphis, Central Florida. There are teams where you can get not just amazing wins. They already have their great big win in Houston, but they need some more meat on the bones of that resume. The American's actually the perfect conference because these teams aren't like the top tier of the ACC. I don't think they're as good as that 10 group in the Big Ten, but they still are under the consideration of those 9, 10, 11 seeds. And if you're the one who pops out from them and win more than you lose in that group, you are going to go dance.
Well, you mentioned teams that are popping around there. You mentioned Memphis. Titel, is Memphis in talks now?
Barely. I really thought this team was a year away. Coach Penny Hardaway is bringing in his former AAU player, 7-footer James Wiseman next fall, who's, depending on who you ask, the number 1 or number 2 recruit for the class of 2019. But this team was 3-3 in November. I thought, oh, great, they'll have a nice mediocre season. They've gone 12-3 since then. They've lost to 3 teams who are not just good, but might all be protected seeds: Texas Tech, Tennessee, and the aforementioned Houston Cougars. Even more impressive to me.
And LSU, there could be 4 there. I mean, LSU's not that bad.
LSU's a 5 seed probably right now. Yeah.
Appreciate. And what's even more impressive to me, they're not doing this with like an experienced tall point guard. They have a 5'9" freshman and Tyler Harris running the show. So kudos to Penny. I didn't think he was going to be this good this quickly.
Right.
David, they have to lift some more weight, but before the end of the year. But
yeah, I don't think they're there this year. I agree with that. They've got one win between tier 1 and 2 combined, and it's against Yale. But David, what about the upcoming week in the American? What are you circling?
Cincinnati needs to continue to hold serve. While they have the bloated record, it's kind of a small margin for error.
Huge game at Temple on Sunday, yeah.
Yeah, the big game at Temple on Sunday, that one's big. And I think the Houston-Tulsa game on Sunday is big because Tulsa, while not in the scope of the NCAA, a bit of a home court hero, a win against Kansas State, and I think 10-1 at home this year. So not the easiest place to go win.
Let's take a quick look over at the Atlantic 10. Titel, let me start with you. You wanted to talk about the team on top there, the undefeated in conference Billikens.
So they started off the month of January by getting rid of Carte R. Gordon, their 6'9" star freshman. He decided to transfer. All they've done since then, win 5 in a row. Talk about addition by subtraction and to get to the top of the conference standings. The good news, they only faced Davidson once, and it's in St. Louis. The bad news, they only faced VCU once, but it's in Richmond. Another team, I mentioned like Kansas State, terrible at free throw shooting. Even worse, under 59% from the line, bottom 5 in the nation. But their magic number is 65. When they hold teams to 65 or less, which they've done 15 times this year, 14-1. So they're getting it done on the defensive end.
Yeah. What are the teams we like, Chad? Since I know it's real quick, but George Mason, we were big on them coming into the year. They kind of let us down. Have they figured it out? And if so, does that kind of wreck St. Louis and VCU and some of these teams that have a smattering of good on their profile if Mason goes in and blows out the league after getting off to such a horrendous start?
I think some Mason wins could help these teams if these teams could then beat Mason. So I would kind of argue it's the.
I think you got to do well out of conference. Unfortunately, I think that's what David's hitting, and he's right. I would actually.
But is there a shot, Joby, with VCU and St. Louis for 2 bids out of this conference?
I think it's interesting because John actually hit something I was going to say, which was it's excellent point about St. Louis's schedule. The problem is they only play each of them once, and those are your wins that you can build resume on. You almost need more of them. VCU needs more of them because I think both St. Louis and VCU are in a conversation, but boy, they better have a 1, 2, or 3 at the end of the loss column after all of this in conference at most. And they got to beat Davidson, who's probably not going to be in the at-large discussion at all. So these teams, and I know VCU's already lost to Davidson, they need to beat the Davidsons of the world as well as George Mason and whoever pops out like Rhode Island, who could be tough in Rhode Island.
Yeah, to Joby's point, when the best games that you have available to you are NIT teams on the road, you better win them. And VCU didn't do that. They lost at Davidson.
Right. The big game this week is probably Davidson at St. Louis that we mentioned already. Also kind of circled as a Big Five matchup. St. Joe's at Penn on Saturday, but
And
not
maybe
bad
maybe
St. Joe's
Dayton
this year.
maybe Dayton on Wednesday night can expose Mason. And Dayton actually has a little meat on their resume. They're one of the aforementioned Butler beaters. So, maybe Dayton could help the conference by making a run. But, it's tough.
Over in the Mountain West, Nevada, after suffering the earlier loss, continues. Actually, David survived at Boise State before they blew out Air Force over the weekend.
Yeah, Nevada is still a really good team, and they might be kind of they might be kind of dealing with a rut that a lot of really good teams from decent but not really good leagues get into, and that's where it's just kind of hard to get motivated night after night after night when the best you can hope for is to not stub your toes and not blow it. No one remaining on Nevada's schedule is going to elevate them. So the best they can hope for the rest of the way is to hold serve, and that can kind of get mentally exhausting. I think Nevada is better than what they've shown in their last couple games with the loss to, well, certainly the blowout loss at New Mexico and then needing a 3 at the buzzer to beat Boise. But we might see them continue to have games like that the rest of the way. We might see them drop a few because how excited can you really get when you look at everything that's before the NCAA tournament and realize the best you can hope for is to not hurt yourself.
Yeah, well, here's a team that David has no wins against anybody that's solidly in the field, and a loss to somebody that's not even close to the field. So isn't that worse than Auburn? But Titel, I know you want to talk about New Mexico.
No, they won at Fresno. That's better than anything Auburn's done.
We talked about Minnesota's road 27-point loss to Illinois. This is it is worse. It's a 27-point loss at freaking New Mexico. David talked about stubbing your toe. I can't think of one that stands out more to me than this.
Well, that's not stubbing your toe. That's amputating your foot.
Touche. And instead of bouncing back and having a change New Mexico season, they lost 3 in a row by double digits to UNLV, Colorado State, and San Diego State after that great win. Huge size like DePaul, 4 starters, at least 6'7". If they don't turn things around, Nevada might have a 1-loss season with it being a Tier 5 loss. It's insane.
I do want to give a shout out in this conference to Air Force. 106 points against UNLV. That was a record for Air Force since they joined the Mountain West. So amazing that how bad UNLV is. That was UNLV's first conference loss too. It was a very strange game.
This conference stinks.
It does. The teams that we wanted to be good, Fresno, Utah State, they're not.
The only games of note this week are the Nevada games. They're hosting Colorado State. I think that's, in fact, their only game this week, if I'm reading that screen correctly. But let's take a quick look at Joby. How about Gonzaga?
Gonzaga they're kind of in that same position, though. I think the West Coast is actually better than the Mountain West this year. At least eye test. San Francisco has a bunch of good losses. But Gonzaga's in the same position that David so eloquently put Nevada. They can't stub their toe. Luckily for them, they have an out-of-conference win against a 1 seed on a neutral court. So that's pretty darn freaking good. They are one of these teams, because of that gets you in the conversation for one of those 1-seed slots. The problem is the West Coast Conference will not give them the meat to allow them to achieve that when you have your ACC pairings, your 2 Michigan schools. If Kansas were ever to turn it around with their resume, Kansas has opportunities because even with multiple losses, because they have built up ridiculous, win resumes in Tennessee, etc. But are they good? Yeah. They're one of the best teams in the country. This pure eye test. Yeah. They're deserving of everything they have. Their losses are at Carolina, which we discussed as, a potential high-rising 1 seed, and the number 1 team in the nation right now, Tennessee. So that's pretty darn freaking good.
One of the games one team they haven't played yet at all, Titel, is maybe one of the hottest teams of the West Coast there on the right. How about the Gales?
I did not like them coming into the season. When you lose a guy like Jock Landale, I assume you're going to go down heavily, and obviously losing at home to Harvard, I think, qualifies. But if you look at the Tier 1 losses, 4 points, 4 points, 4 points. They're losing to good teams by small margins. And the way they're doing it is with three-point shooting, almost 40%, top 15 in the nation. And right behind Gonzaga, tied with the Dons. They get the rematch with San Francisco on February 2nd. They play the Zags twice in the final 3 weeks of the season, so they're going to have their chances. I don't see them as an at-large or even close right now, but obviously you can beat the Dons and win 1 of 2 against Gonzaga. I'd consider ahead of a conversation about it.
David, upcoming week, this week in the West Coast, Gonzaga's only game is at Santa Clara. St. Mary's, Gales we just discussed that. They got a test at BYU at least.
They should win that one. BYU just is not impressive this year. As you see, they're 12-9 overall. St. Mary's should be able to win both of those. I'm expecting them to.
Well, David, let me stick with you then and discuss a different team. In the top 25 still out of the Mid-American Conference, how about the Buffalo Bulls?
Really like them. Very deserving of the ranking. I think they are one of the 25 best teams in the country. The wins.
Are they one of the top 15? Because you didn't think they were.
I don't think they are.
Why not?
I just don't. I guess the short answer is that I just don't think. I think there are more than 15 teams that would beat them if they played on a neutral floor. They're certainly very deserving of their ranking. The win at West Virginia, which I think got everybody excited out of the gate, has lost a lot of its sparkle. The win at Syracuse, while good, it was excellent, is I don't think Syracuse is a top 15 team. I think San Francisco's good. That's not top 15 either. If they were really a top 15 team, I think they would have won a little more decisively. But one of the games that impressed me the most was that home win against Toledo, who Toledo, while not good, is still pretty decent, and Buffalo just blew them off the court. But they weren't really in that game for Marquette. They were in it for maybe a half. Marquette ended up blowing it open. It's more of an opinion. A case can certainly be made that they are one of the 15 best teams. A case can be made that they deserve a protected seat, especially if they win out. I'm not going to be upset if they end up getting it. I don't think that the committee would necessarily be wrong. But if you're asking my personal opinion, I wouldn't rank them in the top 15.
Well, let me ask you that same question. I mean, they've got 2 road tests this week at Northern Illinois and at Kent State. But is this Buffalo team, should they continue to roll through the MAC as they've been doing so far, are they a top 4 seed?
I think so. David hit it on the head with the fact that they beat the second best team in the conference by 30 points. They have 17 wins with 13 regular season games left. Even if they stub their toe once or twice, I think this is going to be a 30-win team entering the NCAA tournament, and I wouldn't want to play them. Trust me, Arizona did not want to play them.
I would love to play them. It would mean we were in the tournament.
On that note, I just want to have a quick score update here. Should be showing up on the screen if we did this right.
This is wrong. This is the dark web.
It didn't work. It didn't show up on the screen.
The people think the NFL referees screwed up. They did not see what just happened at Rutgers.
Congratulations to Scarlet Knights after beating Ohio State at home earlier. Now have a win over Nebraska. Tim Miles goes down. Is not the best coach in the state of New Jersey.
Yes, he is. Well, it's hard to be the best coach when you were routinely and systematically cheated by just the large conspiracy that's working against them.
But that hits exactly the point I was talking about with Ohio State and Wisconsin. You can't lose to that bottom 4, Minnesota. You can't do that because there are too many opportunities for losses. If Nebraska now has a losing record in the Big Ten, it hurts, and it might cost them a bit if they go too far under.
Let me throw this out there. Last year, Nebraska lost 5 conference games and missed the NCAA tournament. They have now lost 5 conference games already this year.
That's because there were only 4 worthy Big Ten teams last year.
It just goes. Well, no, there were 5.
This year,
Nebraska got unjustly left out.
This year there are 10, including Nebraska, as of right now, even after the loss to Rutgers. I'm just saying you better put this warning signals out.
Joby, let's move to final thoughts, and I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, and here it's a reverse. I'm going to pick out 2 teams because they create domino theories in their own ways. Arizona State, if they are a tournament team, they give Nevada a very good win over a tournament team. Without Arizona State in, Nevada is devoid of that and will be devoid of that. That will kill Nevada's chances of moving up into the 1, 2, 3 area. Maybe they hang on to a 4, et cetera. But if you beat nobody, they're so dependent on Arizona State. It's remarkable to die. It's in Arizona State wins helps the Pac-12 and helps. I mean, it's the whole interconnection of it. The bigger one, though, I point to is Houston in the American Athletic. Right now, you heard when I was defending Temple, it's like they're the only ones who gave Houston a loss. Well, if Houston starts going on a stretch where they lose to an SMU and a Central Florida and then a Memphis, and then they wind up with 4 losses in conference, Temple's win isn't that great. And if Temple hasn't collected a ton of wins against Cincinnati and Central Florida, Temple's out. And but if Houston goes with 1 loss and Temple gets a couple of wins, gets Memphis, Cincinnati, and Central Florida, they're in. You have to root for teams, not just your own. You have to take care of your own business first, but you have to be aware of what makes your resume special. And as a fan, if you're a Nevada fan, you better be an Arizona State fan. If you're a Temple fan, you better be a Houston fan. Yes, that means unless it means your team doesn't win the conference.
John.
So you kind of glossed over that St. Joe's Penn game upcoming this weekend, and I'm going to set the stage and explain why.
Good. Thank you.
So let me take you back to New Year's Eve when my Quakers faced an 0-12 Monmouth team and lost by 2 at home in overtime. I still can't believe that it happened. They go out on the road Saturday night. They beat the mighty Temple Owls with the great Fran Dunphy, and they're now 3-0 in Big 5 play with 1 game left this year, which happens to be at the Palestra on Saturday against St. Joe's. If they can beat the Hawks, I'm not saying they will, but if
they will,
they will complete a sweep of the other 4 teams in the Big 5 for only the 2nd time in my lifetime. I'm an old man. This is a big deal. That year in 2002 when they did it, there was a 3-team Ivy playoff with us and Princeton and Yale, and we had somehow beat them to end up in the tournament. To give you an idea how long ago that was, there were 2 future D1 coaches playing in that game. Penn had Andy Toole, who's now at Robert Morris, and we played Cal, who had Shante Leggins, who now coaches Eastern Washington. You say the Big 5 is a small time, I say it's a big freaking deal.
I love the Big 5.
Yeah, I do too.
I live right outside of Philadelphia, but
a trivia question before I get to my final thought that I honestly don't know the answer to. Has the winner of the Big 5 ever missed the NCAA tournament? I don't think they have. LaSalle won it and got in the year that they won it, and Penn may get in via the automatic bid. Has it ever happened? I don't think that it has.
Well,
great question.
Penn will have to win the Ivy League tournament at Yale in order to pull out. They'll have to make the Ivy League tournament.
Right, have to make it.
And then they're going to have to win it. But, David, let you finish off the show.
I'd like to talk about an administrative issue, and that is we rail on it from time to time, and I don't think we rail on it nearly enough, and that is replay in the college game. I'm all for the refs getting it right, but I'm not for multiple stoppages that last minutes at a time to where I can't even figure it out. Like, it looks like 2 of them go to the monitor and they're still not sure, so they call the 3rd guy in and they huddle up. And getting the call right is important, but not interrupting the flow of the game is also important. I think that a call should be made on the floor, and if they need to go to replay, that's fine, but they should stop. It should be capped at 60 seconds, because if the standard is indisputable evidence, anything indisputable should immediately pop out within 60 seconds. After 60 seconds, if you still aren't sure, then it's too close to call, so go with the original call. It is annoying. It's bad for the fans. It's bad for the players. It's bad for everything when you stop for minutes at a time. And from a fan standpoint, who likes watching referees watch television? And from a player's standpoint, it just disrupts the game. It's more disruptive than a bad call.
And David, indisputable video evidence, if the first 2 referees don't agree and they got to bring the 3rd guy in, does that already make it disputable?
Yes. Yes.
So why do you need the 3rd guy? I can't figure that out.
I'm not for getting rid of replay entirely. I'm for restructuring it in a way that makes sense and doesn't disrupt the flow of the game as much as it does, because it's ridiculous. I mean, it's to the point to where it's hard to even enjoy the game sometimes.
But I guess on that note, that does conclude our show for the evening. So I do want to thank everybody for joining us. On behalf of Joby Fortson, John Titel, David Griggs, I'm Chad Sherwood. We'll be back again with more podcasts later on this week. But have a great night, everybody. We'll talk to you again real soon.